I'll be getting episode 41 of 84 Feet with Cady and Cap. With Brian Cady, no Cap because it's a recap portion of the episode. Duh. It's me. It's Jeff Molina from Empire State Takeover to review a very, very busy week in Section 2. That was the pre-holiday weekend and really holiday weekend as well. Rush of games that we experienced. You remember last week, Jeff, you called it probably the busiest week on the schedule pre-sectionals. And your travels definitely reflected that. So all in all, how are you feeling, and how is the car feeling? Have you had a good chat with Betty and called her a good girl, or I'm just kidding. I don't know your car.
Yeah, I got to try to warm her up as much as possible this time of year. Yeah, this is, and I didn't even do quite as much travel as I expected, just because, honestly, I woke up a little late on Martin Luther King Day, and I was going to go out to Syracuse. The matchups didn't really work out. It was a tournament. It didn't really work out quite how I wanted. I was still planning on going, but I got up a little late. I was a little tired, and it was one of those, like, I have to listen to my body now and then, and I've felt like that going into days where I have done the complete day, and then I've been wiped out for the next few days after that. So I just didn't do anything on Monday. So it wasn't quite as crazy. But yeah, I mean, it was still the Utica trip for the Juggler Classic, which was 2 games with, a level of intensity that felt more like 3 or 4. Sunday I was with you the whole time at SUNY Adirondack. I'll give it the new brand name for the 6 games there. We had fun little drives back that night. But yeah, there's 3 stretches to me during the regular season that stick out as far as just busy and the travel for everybody, not just me. I travel 12 months a year, but the travel for teams going to different areas and seeing some different matchups. There's 3 different ones before sectionals hit. It's a tip-off tournament weekend, early December. You have holiday break week, and then Martin Luther King weekend. So this is a big one for non-league games, for tournaments, for showcases, all sorts of things. So now we settle into the dog days. Now we've officially hit dog days season for the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it. And I know in the past we basically just taken an entire chunk of time and just focused in on specifically the games you went to. But I'm thinking what we're going to do is we're going to kind of mesh it in as we go class by class this time around. So we'll make it all work. So starting with Class D, I'm trying to think. I think we only had one Class D team in Section 2 technically on Sunday. Or no, Lake George is Class C, so we had nobody from Class D. So Class D, just Hartford keeps chugging along, man. They get a really gritty 2-point win at Lake George on Tuesday. They take care of things with North Warren Friday, and then they get another W on Martin Luther King Day at Scroon Lake. On the other side of things, the team that we keep discussing as being right there neck and neck with them as far as, being in contention as what a lot of people are basically looking at as Northville versus Spa Catholic. They end up getting a pair of wins last week as they defeated Fort Ann and Hoosick Valley. So, going into action last night, and I know I said I was going to bring up Tuesday night action because we're recording this on Wednesday, January 22nd. But I want to bring this up because it's going to lead to a side discussion in a second. But Spa Catholic down one of their key pieces. They end up going into Cambridge, had a lead after 3 quarters. In fact, at one point, if I can pull up my conversation real quick from last night with one of the parents from Spa Catholic, they were up 13 at one point in that third quarter. And then just Cambridge chipped away slowly, but surely. Eventually took a lead with, I think it was about 2.5, 3.5 minutes left, somewhere in that ballpark. And then Cambridge was just able to scrape by and hold on for a home win against Spa Catholic. So just a case of, you have a key missing piece. You fumble the bag a little bit on the road, but now you just gotta kind of reset and recover. So a case of one team kind of inching further towards that 2 seed because Hartford has that win in hand over Spa Catholic, and they just had a really good week themselves. And Spa Catholic trying to keep pace and hope for maybe overtaking the 2 in a way on Hartford, have a little bit of a slip up on the road. So that's how things are kind of looking right now in D.
Yeah, out of the 6 classes, D was the least active last week. That's in Section 2, and that's statewide. As I was putting my notes and rankings and all that stuff together, where I've got loads of things to factor in with all the other classes. With D, I was like, Lafargeville beat Edwards Knox, and Hartford's still winning, and that's about it. It's just another week of the grind, and you play who's in front of you on the schedule. Hartford, that's a solid win. Just saw Lake George on Sunday, and for Hartford, that's a solid win for them. That Lake George team is one that can create some matchup issues for a Hartford group whose tallest kid is probably about 5'6". So that's a good win for them. Once it gets to you want to win as far as the just being a competitor, right? Putting your best foot forward and winning basketball games. In Class D, the seeding is probably going to matter less than any other class because there won't be that many teams that qualify, or not to qualify, but there won't be that many teams in the field. And we are looking at it as Northville, Hartford, Spa, and then, with all due respect, kind of everybody else. And by the time we get to that point, whether one's the 2 or one's the 3, it's going to be a neutral site anyways. Right. So, it'll just be who wears the home jerseys and who wears the away jerseys at that point. But you want to be able to put your best foot forward this time of year where, we've made it to, it's January 22nd, as you said, we've made it to the 3rd month of the year. So, good to see with Hartford that they're finding ways to win kind of, different, or maybe not different styles of games, but finding ways to win against different kinds of opponents. So just, nothing overly newsworthy in Class D so much. It's just teams kind of chugging along.
Yeah, and, having talked with because Cap and I didn't get a chance to talk with Hartford head coach Jason Johnson and his daughter, Junior Mackenzie Johnson, until Monday before that Scroon Lake game. And basically what it sounded like was they put a good amount of making sure Maddie Brennan didn't get too out of order or out of hand against them, and just were really effective in hitting the glass. And that's really what was a deciding factor in that game. So certainly a good job by Hartford in that regard. And they have a game at Corinth coming up later in the week on Friday, if I remember correctly. So that'll be, a little bit of an interesting measurement considering how we saw Corinth a few days ago, and what they, we'll see what Corinth can do there.
Yeah, how they bounce back from that. We might be talking about that in a little while, but
right. Moving on to Class C then. And this is where we really start dipping into your travels, because it involves the first game you saw last week, which was on Monday, on the 13th. Stillwater, man, it was Mechanicville's first game officially with Tanner Eisman back in the lineup. As she was out for 4 or 5 games, I believe. I think it was 4 in the end. And Mechanicville was able to win all those games, take care of business without Tanner Eisman and I think it was an ankle injury, if I remember correctly, that she was out. But Tanner had come back that Monday night, the 13th, for Mechanicville. But Stillwater said, excuse me, we're here. And they went out and made a really, really nice statement win at home against Mechanicville. I mean, dude, I know you walked away a little befuddled and confused in a way from that game on the 13th. And then, then the interesting part was, and again, this is me going back to the fact that I wasn't going to talk about Tuesday games, but just because it mixes in, Stillwater goes to their place last night, and it's same song, second verse. Stillwater ends up winning with, I think it ended up being like a 28-point win.
8-35, 67-30 in Stillwater, and then 68-35.
All right, so it was a 33-point win. So is it? So basically, the question becomes this: is Stillwater just that damn good? Is Mechanicville kind of fumbling the bag here as they are going through the start of the second half of the season? Is it a little bit of both? What was your takeaway from those 2 games? I know you weren't at the second game last night, but seeing the result of that and combining it with your observations from game 1 back on the 13th, what's your takeaway from those 2 games in 9 days?
Stillwater is that good in a sense. I think that's the primary point to be had from this, that Stillwater is that good. I also think we've discussed this before. I feel like I'm somewhat careful with my wording because I'm not trying to shoot down Class B, but the whole C versus B thing right now in Section 2, where Class C is kind of, the top of C, not all of it. There's more depth in B than there is in C, but the top of C is on another level compared to the higher end in B, where you look at Stillwater. If they were Class B this year, like they were B last year, if they were B this year, there's no way that we wouldn't be talking about them as the favorite. We're not talking about them as the favorite in C. So I think that's we've been saying that without necessarily actually coming out and saying it for months, or maybe we have come out and said it, but that just that puts numbers to it. Stillwater's there's a few different things. Stillwater's also not a very good match, Stillwater's not a very good matchup for Mechanicville. So, that was part of the takeaway, even with Tanner back in the lineup. Just Stillwater's length and Coach Chapko should, developing kind of a defensive identity as far as they're matching up throughout, but their disciplined half-court man-to-man defense mixed with their length and athleticism, not just on the back line with, say, Andy Luskin, Nana Perella, but, your guards, too, with Addie Thornton being able, just long and bouncy and active hands and able to get tips. Maddie Chat, long straight line athlete, gets tips. Watching that game against Mechanicville, it was Mechanicville just struggled to get, it wasn't like they got good shots and missed. Yeah, they weren't getting quality shots. They weren't getting quality attempts. They weren't able to run through action to get reasonable scoring opportunities. It was a rough night for them dealing with the athleticism and the discipline of Stillwater half court man-to-man defense. That game was also interesting because I thought they did a pretty good job. And this is kind of a side note, but in that particular, the first game at Stillwater, that was also a milestone game where Miranda Price scored 1,000 point. And I thought they did a decent job. So just for the record, to anybody that listens to this, I didn't realize it was going to be Miranda's 1,000 point game. Like, I didn't realize she was 16 away going into that game. And this is nothing against her. This is just my general rule. I don't like to go to 1,000 point games. That a lot of people do. I don't like going to 1,000 point games. I've had parents mad at me this year. Like, how come you didn't go to my 1,000 point game? I love you all. I really don't, for the most part, unless I know somebody has absolutely no clue that they're close. I don't love going to 1,000 point games. Everybody plays different. The individual that's close plays differently. The players around her play differently. The coach might coach differently. And it's always kind of an anomaly sort of game. So I don't care to see the anomaly sorts of games. Unless I know, like, you don't know, or you really are just so headstrong and not caring about that I know you're not going to change your approach to the game. So I didn't realize it was going to be a 1,000 point game. I thought as a team they did a pretty good job of, if there weren't the signs and the t-shirts and the extra cameras that I've never seen before, I wouldn't have known. I thought that their approach to how they played the game was consistent with just kind of, Miranda's going to find a way to get 16. They kind of took care of the game first before they took care of the milestone, which I thought that was good for, it's a younger team, a lot of freshmen and sophomores. It's easy to get caught up in emotional whirlwinds as younger players. And, I didn't see any of that. So that was good to see. So that was a little side note and my little vent about, parents getting mad at me about not seeing their kids' 1,000 point games. But yeah, Stillwater. I think Stillwater's on they're just kind of on another level. Like, they are that good. Now, Mechanicville, I will say, when I walked away from that game in Stillwater, when you bring up that I was befuddled and confused, I thought they kind of rolled over. Like, I expected a more competitive effort. I thought that there was a relatively competitive effort out of the gate, and then they kind of got punched in the mouth in the second quarter of that game. And it's a 15-point game at half. I'm like, all right, we'll see how they respond coming out of the locker room. They've made comebacks before. They were down against LaSalle, right, and they came back and won. And they were down double digits against Tamarack, and they came back and won. And they're just it was blah. Like, it was so blah coming out of the locker room that I was. When you bring up the word befuddled, that's what I was befuddled by. I did not expect that. But then They turn around, Stillwater dominates the first half in the Tuesday night game. So, there's something to be said about the level that they are at.
Another team that I guess can be a bit befuddling to keep with the theme. And I know that technically in conference they are playing up, but it's still a team I want to say maybe we expected different results at certain times from them this year. And that'd be Maple Hill. Because and just looking over their schedule, like this is what I mean. So their first two losses this season, which were the season opener at Coxsackie Athens, was a 3-point game. And then their second loss was against Catskill, but at home. But again, only a 3-point game. It wasn't like, it was. They were both competitive losses. You'll take those. Then we got that Sunday brunch time extraordinaire at Voorheesville that you went to a couple weeks ago. Actually, it was a week and a half ago. And we broke that down last week. But then they were able to bounce back last Tuesday. Coach Oliver gets his 50th career victory. They beat Greenville at Greenville. Okay, cool. They go to Germantown and take care of business in a non-conference game there. Or I think is it Germantown? I'm trying to think. I think Germantown's
Patron.
Oh, they are Patron. Okay, so they take care of.
Unless it's playing independent this year or whatever. But yeah, they used to be CHVL when that was a thing when I started.
Right. Wow, CHVL. Wow. Memories. But then they play at SUNY Adirondack, or as it's still labeled here in the website I'm looking at, Adirondack Community College, and they lose to a decent Peru team, Class A team on Saturday by 14, and then it just looked like Sunday. I don't know if it was doing the 3-3. I don't know. I'm not one to have rumor conjecture, but they just really looked out of sorts against Del High in the game that we saw on Sunday, ultimately dropping that one by 17. Is Maple Hill a case of where, and this is kind of the same question I have a little bit when it comes to Spa Catholic in a way, but we didn't really discuss it, but I'll focus on Maple Hill. Is it a case of is there not enough help there for Addie Lazinski? Is it still a year away really for them, or should they? Is this a case where the higher expectations I think we kind of had for them going in the season were deserved, and it's just a case of they're having mid-season pains and again, for lack of a better phrase, they're kind of fumbling the bag a little bit here midway through the season.
What's my favorite word?
Consistency.
Yeah, not the Too Short song. Yes, consistency. That's be consistent in your approach. And I feel like what I've seen from them is, if we're gonna label, there's a couple. They have clear strengths and clear weaknesses. We'll start with that. Like, this is a team that's got clear strengths, and if they're able to make the game be played a certain way, they're great. And they have clear weaknesses, and if teams are able to exploit those weaknesses, they're in trouble. And we'll get to that in a second. But I think that the biggest thing is, to me, is consistency and approach. There's I feel like they kind of, I don't want to point fingers at anyone or anything and say that, some kids are more competitive or less competitive or care more or care less, not going down that road. But I think of it more like it's a group that I see kind of ride the wave of momentum. and they'll ride the wave of momentum to the crest, and they'll ride the wave of momentum all the way back down into the ground. I felt that way. This is an out of area example, but this is something that I had brought up. You've been doing the girls' state thing for a minute now, so you saw the Webster Schrader team that won the state championship a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Before that year, the couple of years before, that's where Schrader was at. They had a lot of talent. They didn't have like state championship talent, but they had a lot of talent. Could have potentially made it out of Section 5, but they just when things were going great, it was, ride the wave, hooting and hollering, bench celebrations, doing the rowboat and all that sort of stuff. And when somebody made an 11-0 run on them, it was crickets, absolute crickets. And they just kind of rode, that you just saw the body language, up, down, and I feel like that to an extent. I've seen, because I've got to see Maple Hill on the downs, right? I know what they're like on the ups, and I got to see them on the downs over the last couple Sundays, and I think that just and that I don't even think is a youth thing, because they're young in the sense of they have kids coming back next year, but they're not young in the sense of being 13. They're just, I think that they're the consistency in their approach to the game still has steps that need to be taken. Now, going to the clear strengths and the clear weaknesses, what Voorheesville and Delhi had in common is they were both able to pressure them. And if you have depth of athletic guards that are able to pressure the ball and force guards into handling against it, I think that's the biggest thing, where it's not like we're not talking about zone pressure 2-2-1 or 1-2-1-1 or it's teams that matched up against them and kind of grinding them out full court man to man. If you make them handle the ball against you, if you have the guards that can match their athleticism and they're able to pressure the ball and turn, make guards have to turn, change direction while dribbling the basketball, make quick decisions. They've shown to have trouble with being pressured in that way. Voorheesville bothered them with that. Delhi is younger than Maple Hill. Delhi is a bunch of sophomores and an 8th grader, and they were missing an important player in that win too. And Todd Bruce, I know it's out of not Section 2. I know it's Section 4, but there's Section 2 tie-in. Fun fact: Waynesburg coach Chris Herron, where did he get his coaching start? At Delhi with Todd Bruce.
Yep.
So there's some tie-in involved here, but so I'll rope that in. But Coach Bruce does a fantastic job with that team, with that program, year in and year out. And Maple Hill also, what they did was they bumped into a team that has progressed over the course of winter the way that it's just like the ultimate way, like the benchmark sort of way that you look at and say, I want teams to look like this in January compared to what they look like in November. So Delhi is playing really well right now. They bumped into a team that's really kind of hitting their stride, and also a team that can take advantage of what their weaknesses are. But yeah, I mean, that's consistency and approach. But Maple, we talk about the lack of strength of schedule coming from the Patroon, where you get a couple good matchups and then the rest of them you just have to find your own sort of energy. You need these non-league games. Like you can't spend, if you're a Maple Hill, you can't spend your non-league games playing like the bottom. You play the Patroon. You can't mess around with like the bottom of the whack and and get anything productive out of it. You need to be as aggressive with your non-league scheduling as possible if you have high hopes. And with that comes some of this. So they're in a little bit of a rut. The what I call it the dog days, and it kind of looks like the dog days for them right now. So they've got a little time to swing it back around.
And what'll be very, very interesting for Maple Hill. Who do they host at home tonight?
Who do they host at home tonight?
It's their other end of the home and home with Voorheesville.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, they set up a home and home as two of their non-league games with Voorheesville. So,
I wonder if Mia will be back.
Correct.
Mia Carmody, who will, I don't know if we're going to talk about that, but missed, the last 3 games the Voorheesville got wins in. But I think she might be back, either that or she's close from an ankle injury. So that I'm curious. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's where we sit there. 2 other Class C teams were there on Sunday for us. Hoosick Valley was in the second game of the day.
Game 2, yep.
They took care of All Sable Valley. Did I get that right? All Sable? Yeah. Low scoring game, 34-31. It was a bit of a struggle for both teams, but Hoosick Valley was able to get a win. It was a nice win in the regard that they were behind and they didn't let it get to them. They kept fighting, they kept pushing, and eventually took a lead late and held on to the lead. So it was a good win in that regard for Hoosick Valley, that Hoosick Valley team. And then the other Class C team, Greenwich. This was the week of Greenwich. Hold Emma Willard to 4 points total last Monday. You take care of Tamarack handily on Thursday. And then Saturday, you walk over Plattsburgh. And then Sunday, Sunday. Oh, Peru.
You hold Peru in one field goal in the first half.
Where basically Brooke Kuzmic ran Peru out of the gym. It was literally just transition. It seemed like a transition bucket for Brooke Kuzmic or a steal and runaway score. Like she was just, and it's funny because they didn't have Jordan Wolf because she was out with, from what I understand, I believe she's recovering from mono and should be back pretty soon. Mm-hmm. So it was also nice to see Olivia Davis back out there looking healthy, moving around well. There was a case where really Bailey Wolf and Grace Autiello just kind of, I'm not saying they did, but it was a game where Brooke Kuzmic was just so dominant because of her speed and tenacity and aggressiveness that Grace and Bailey were basically allowed to just go, hey, do your thing, girl. And Brooke was just like a complete Tasmanian devil against that Peru team. And between that and their tenacious full court press, Greenwich showed that, they don't have to have everybody clicking on all cylinders offensively to be a force, not just in Section 2, but beyond on a regional or state level, man. They are just, they're a force, man. They're a force. That's the best way to put it, man.
Yeah, so I had a quandary. I was in, a little thought that I had to work through over the weekend. For the first time in my rankings, my Upstate 20, I am not a knee-jerk reaction mover as far as moving people way up and down the line. So for the first time going into this week, which I just posted all of them except for Class D, which will be up this afternoon, I had to make a new number 1. With Frewsburg was 1, Greenwich was 2, Randolph was 3, Frewsburg and Randolph played each other round one of probably what will be 3 out in Section 6 last week.
Randolph that was an impressive
And
win for Randolph, wasn't it?
very, very impressive. It was 59-50 with the final one of those, like the final score looks closer than the game was actually played. So I had to have a new number one. And granted, Randolph did that last year too. They won at Randolph, and Frewsburg won the game at Frewsburg and a neutral site. So we'll see how it goes this year. But that was a great round one win for Randolph. So I had to make a new number one. And my thought was leapfrog Randolph into that number one spot, who I have seen them a couple times in person already, and they're worthy of it. Or just move them up the line, move Greenwich up the line to 1, move Randolph up the line to 2. And what it was going to boil down to was the eye test on Sunday as they played Peru. Greenwich is number 1. After that, Greenwich is number 1 right now. I wasn't just impressed with the fact that they beat Peru by 39. Which I was, because Peru is a pretty good team. That's a group that I've seen play games against Section 2 teams. I've seen them play up in Platts, in the Plattsburgh area. I've seen their kids play AAU. That's a pretty good team. It wasn't just the fact that it was a 60-21 win. It was the fact that they were able to do it without Jordan, who brings a lot to them at both ends of the floor. Offensively, as a floor, like she's a floor spacer, ability to shoot the 3. Notre Dame found that out at the Amsterdam event where she hit like 6 or 7 of them. But she's a floor spacer that can shoot the 3, but she's also big enough to mix it up on the defensive glass for them. So yeah, she brings them real value at both ends of the floor. And the fact they were able to do it without her, and the fact that that game wasn't, I love the Greenwich gym for its small town, old school flair, but it is a box. It's a small little court. And the word with, every good school playing them, whether it's Queensbury in the previous 2 or 3 years, or Stillwater now, or whoever else may have, has to play them down the line. The phrase that I hear brought up consistently is, well, let's see what happens when we get them on a 94-foot court. Once you get to the later round sectionals, we're talking Hudson Valley, and this one, it's all college courts, 94 by 50. How they look defensively on a night that was on a 94-foot court Sunday at Adirondack Community College. How they look defensively against a pretty athletic Peru team, like a Peru team that tends to out-athlete a lot of who they play. They look like they were being guarded by 7 kids the entire game. And it was just matchup, discipline, physical, tough, cut you off, bump every cut. There's a, if they were to do, something I've seen at the collegiate level a little bit, the 30-second perfect defense drill, you throw 30 on the shot clock, and maybe you have like 3 or 4 defensive principles that you're sticking to, as far as, no baseline drives or closing out to certain hands or whatever it may be, and you're kind of drilling those concepts. And whenever you see one person screw up one thing, whoever's on the shot clock, you tell them to reset it, and they've got to go 30 seconds with perfect defense before they get off the court. Greenwich, like the way they played Sunday, they would have won that drill a lot. There were no liabilities. Being able to do that with the spacing of a 94-foot court was probably more impressive than anything else I think that I've seen from them this year. So, they're really developing into that state level sort of team that we've had the expectations and the hopes through this entire season. And yes, all that I didn't talk about Brooke. Brooke was really good.
Oh, by the way,
Brooke was very good. She's just an engine. She's an engine. She's a catalyst for them. It feels like, and they've got they've got a gang of good players. And we didn't really talk about Bailey Wolf so much. I'm probably higher on the Bailey Wolf train than a lot of people. Like it feels like when a lot of times when they need something, when they get to that point where like something's got to get done, Brooke handles it. That's should really good. She's one of the best point guards in Section 2.
And what's scary, Brooke and the Wolf sisters have another year after this.
And Olivia Davis.
That's the scary part is, I mean, that's all I can say. Like, I mean that, four of the five main pieces there have one more year after this together, so it can with the cohesion can only get better at this point, which is a really scary thought. If you're anywhere in Class C, and I'd argue, by the way, they're the game of the week this week because they're going to Stillwater tomorrow night on Thursday.
Yep.
I mean, no offense to Colony AP tonight or BP Glens Falls on Saturday or Coxsackie Athens Catskill Sunday, but I'd consider Greenwich Stillwater game of the week material for this week. I mean, we just talked about how impressive Stillwater's been against Mechanicville, twice in 10 days. And, it's going to be kind of an up-and-comer youth movement versus, in certain ways, tough, chiseled veteran squad. Like, I know the Wolf sisters, they played a couple years at SGF before transferring to Greenwich for this year. So, like, when it comes to the big time matchups, they might not have had that experience yet. But Brooke and Grace are two girls that have been to the state finals. They were in the dogfights with Dwaynesburg the last couple of years when Dwaynesburg still had Moses and O'Hanlon and Mulhern. So, like, it's kind of that veteran versus rookie kind of feel where it's like, it's going to be a real test to see, where Stillwater stands, but also where Greenwich stands because, it's two very good teams going head to head for in non-league action.
Yeah, and the Wolves are ready for it too. I know this is their first year with Greenwich, but I do think that there was maybe not last year, was it 2 years ago? I think they made it to Hudson Valley for a semifinal.
I think it was 2 years ago.
A couple years ago, they were young, and they're also like you're talking AAU kids that have kind of been on those courts and seen, they've seen the dogs. Like when you've got that sort of, you got that sort of 12-month basketball experience against some higher level players. I know that the lights of high school season, scholastic season, can be a little different, but they've been in environments and situations that they feel pressure before. So that's for them. That's kind of whatever. To me, it was just more of a matter of them working their way into the fold with Greenwich and how Coach Slater runs his stuff and his expectations, so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a last year when they played they did the similar thing in league. They were just in different classes, so it didn't matter so much in the they didn't see each other after the regular season. But when they played last year, I think Greenwich kind of put it on Stillwater at Greenwich, And then when they played at Stillwater, it was like a 5-point game. So, that's another thought where Stillwater really was able to run with them last year on their home court. So, yeah, that's another interesting part about Thursday. Stillwater seems to have found its stride again. Greenwich clearly has found their stride. The only reason that I am not going to that game is, the only reasons, because both need to apply. I've watched round one, and I have yet to see Broad Albin in person this year, and they play at Queensbury on Thursday at the same time. So I would be so happy if somebody just decided to move their game to 5:00, but that won't happen. So I get to choose. So I'm going up to Broad Albin, Queensbury tomorrow. But yeah, that is Stillwater Greenwich. That's Frewsburg. How I hype up Frewsburg Randolph. That's Frewsburg Randolph East right now. Yeah. So should be a fun one.
And then real quick, the last school I want to give a little love to for Class C. We actually mentioned them briefly in the Class D recap. Lake George, because they were going into the weekend to play 3-3. Probably a little deflated about how things had gone earlier in the week, because they lose a non-league game at Galway last Monday, and they turn around the next night, lose one at home by 2 to Hartford in a conference game where they're basically trying. That's pretty much the top of the Adirondack League, and to drop one at home to Hartford, didn't have to feel good. But then they come out, they take care of business like they should have at home against Fort Anne on Friday night. Now, the only thing I don't know is what happened against Mariah Saturday morning. I don't know if you have the scoop on that, but we do know that Sunday morning they came out and just laid the wood against Saranac Lake in the opening game of what we saw at that SUNY Adirondack. So, this is a team that took the losses on the chin early in the week, turned around, were able to use it as fuel, it looks like, to get through, a very compact weekend. And now they're looking at things pretty good. Where they stack in Class C, given they are right now, they're right there, basically in the same conversation as like a BKW, Galway, even though they lost to them at Galway. And even put them in the same conversation as OESJ at this point. As far as where they sit in that like middling pack right under Greenwich and Stillwater in Class C.
Yeah, they've did Mariah put a whooping on them, or I don't even think I saw that score.
Yeah, for some reason I haven't been able to hunt it down myself either. It's very bizarre. I can't seem to figure it out where. But
55-33, they lost.
Okay, so they have a 2-1 weekend. A 2-1 weekend for them.
Yeah, which that's not a surprise. Mariah's a scrappy group. I was impressed with how they responded to falling behind by double digits against Corinth in that final game on Sunday. I know it's another non-section too, but I was impressed with how I kind of just with a young group. That's a lot of 8th, 9th, 10th graders. That they just stayed in the fight. They didn't really change. Again, consistency and approach of the game. I didn't see any like wearing their emotions on their sleeve or anything after falling behind 12-1, and just kind of dug in and competed and took it possession by possession and ended up winning that game. So I was impressed by that. Lake George is to be honest, the fact that they've won a decent amount of games this year to this point makes me, because because I watched them during summer league, and I know that you can only tell so much during the summer league, but I went up to Hudson Falls and saw them 2 different occasions at that league, and did not have high hopes for them for this year. Long-term potential with the youth with that team, with Maddie Brennan being a freshman, and some of the players around her that are freshman, sophomore. The fact that they've won a decent amount of games this year, my thought has been they're probably a year ahead of schedule right now. So, that's a good for them. Like they're having some winning success. They're getting some close wins. They're taking some close losses. Like this is a kind of a long-term build for them. I see that Jeff Bennett's coaching them, the father of Kenzie and Grace Ann from previous Lake George fame, and I think that's good for them to have him on the sidelines. So, yeah, I think it's good for Maddie as well, being a young 6-footer, having a big guy, big time athlete in his day, big time football player, basketball player. Daughters were collegiate players. One was also big time as a 6'1", 6'2" forward at Georgetown. So, having that on the sidelines is only good for her. And I think that this has been a year of. It seems like this year's been like a year of gaining experience for them, where they've had a lot of the close game experience, and they've won some, they've lost some, and it's just all part of the process.
All right, moving on to Class B. Just taking a look at, we'll talk about the 2 games that we saw from Class B schools first on Sunday. We just mentioned the Corinth game. Don't know how much more you really want to get into that at all against Mariah. We also saw Tamarack, again, gritty, come from behind victory where they just, it was a little bit back and forth, honestly. Tamarack came out hot to start. Then Plattsburgh grinded their way back into it. They took over the lead early in the second half. And then Tamarack was just able to figure things out, run things more efficiently on the offensive end, especially in the fourth quarter. And it didn't have to be necessarily all on Caleb Baudouin, which was very nice to see, especially on the road in a neutral site, in a bigger gym, like you mentioned before about ACC. And Tamarack was able to get the job done against Plattsburgh. Elizabeth Darling, huge game for her. I think she had, 6 or 7 threes, if I remember correctly.
6 threes, breakout game for her.
Yeah, big time game for her. I know that she's been getting a lot of love the last few weeks, just in general, within Section 2. So it was very good to see Tamarack come out and win a game in that fashion where there was early ups, some mid-game downs, but they were able to take that, reverse it, and make things happen in the end to come from behind and scratch away that victory against Plattsburgh.
Oh, how the turntables. Right. Early in the year, they were the team that was up double digits on Mechanicville on their home court and lost the lead and lost by 1. And then fast forward to this past week, which was a 3-1 week for them, only lost to Greenwich. That was back-to-back days at ACC where they took wins after trailing at the end of the third quarter. Because I believe that Saturday they beat Delhi in overtime, and they were down 11 at the end of the third, and I believe that they were down by as much as 13 in the fourth. Ended up coming back and winning that game. Just just showing some resiliency. The day that we were at, close game. It wasn't like they had to dig back from double digits, but just close game hanging in the balance, and they made plays in the fourth. So they're learning how to win games. I think that's key, especially with a team like that. That's not a team that's going to score 65, 70 points. You've seen them at this point. This is a kind of a 50 and under group. A lot of their games are being played in that 44, 48, 46, 39, those sorts of games. Those are always a little more nip tuck, and you've got to find ways to execute and get positive results on possessions in the last 4 to 6 minutes of games. And clearly they did it. I wasn't there for it on Saturday, but clearly they did it. Being able to come back from double digits down against a Delhi team that's playing pretty well and sending that to overtime and getting a win. But Sunday, Plattsburgh game, found ways. It was, and like you said, it was nice to see that it wasn't, when I watched Tamarack play at Hoosick Valley, Hoosick Valley cuts it to 3 late in the third quarter. Tamarack ends the game because Caleb Bedoin says this game is over. And now at, this game against Plattsburgh, she was often the one making the play again. It wasn't like she was just chilling at half court saying, I'll see you on defense sort of thing, or I'll see you when the game is over. She was often making the play, but it was creating and somebody else making a big shot. Elizabeth Darling, 3-3-3 in the fourth quarter. Other kids were able to make play, create and make plays in those last several minutes as well. So it was good to see that it was production coming from different avenues, just figuring out how to win games. And in Class B, as we talk about every single week, how open that is. Yeah. Figure out how to string positive possessions together or positive results on possessions together in the fourth quarter of games. You're going to be in a good place in this group.
Another Class B team you actually got to see was Catskill, and they had a mixed bag week as they started the week last week on Monday. They actually went down and played Wallkill, the Fighting AJ Higbees, led by. I'm glad you appreciate that. Led by Navy commit Zoe Misic, who, I mean, I can't give enough love to that young lady, both for what she does on the court and just the way she handles herself and carries herself off the court. Just a great human being, great family, and at Wallkill, all things considered, they're not the same as they were, the last couple of years. The Dembinski sisters aren't there anymore. It's very much a team that's, and you could attest this maybe a little more than me, but I feel like it's very much a Zoe and the Zoeettes kind of way right now, kind of like Tamarack in a way, where it's
very Zoe centric.
It's Caleb Bedoin and the Bedoinettes in a way, but Wallkill was able to get the win against Catskill 56-44, and then you get to see them bounce back against RCS on I think it was last Thursday at RCS, getting the job done there. So mixed bag week for Catskill, but that's to me, when you're able to walk into the gym that Zoe Misic runs and you only walk away losing by 12, I kind of take that as a W a little bit because Zoe is Zoe.
Can I talk about Zoe for a second?
Oh, absolutely, because I called her the future of Navy basketball when I saw that last week. So, by the way, also McDonald's All-American nominee, Zoe Misic, I should say. So, there you go.
No, I love Zoe because, that's somebody that if I had a daughter, and I don't have kids, thank God, all the parents that are listening to this, you guys are saints. I have
Amen.
cats. That's
Amen.
enough. Yeah, cats are close enough. But the yeah, if I had a daughter that really wanted that came up that said they really wanted to try their hand at this basketball thing, like they really loved it and they wanted to um, try to get the most out of it they possibly could. I would ask Sarah Misach if I could just have her follow Zoe around for a little while. Just like, do what she does. I've as somebody that has loved this sport and loved this game since I was 2-3 years old, literally. I'm always appreciative of the rare bird like her that just that skips no steps. She's skipped 0 steps in the process of being the best version of her that she can possibly be. It's never ducked the difficult stuff. It kind of embraces the hard. That's just her approach to this game is second to none, just as far as maximizing what she can be. So that's somebody that I'm always appreciative of Zoe's process and Zoe's approach, where she just she skipped no steps in becoming who she is. And I think that's a model for whatever kind of player you can be. Like, not everyone's going to be a Zoe kind of player. She's a smaller guard with a deep bag with all the stuff off the dribble and be able to create space to shoot and all. Like, that's not everybody's game, but just how she has maximized what she can be. Like, that's something that's I think a model for others to follow. But back to the kill that we were talking about initially, right? With Catskill. Yeah, I mean, I think that their biggest thing last week, and I say, hopefully I'm not wrong when I say this, because if I am wrong, then they might be in trouble this Sunday. But I think their biggest thing last week was trying to avoid the natural look ahead to Kisaki. So the way their schedule panned out, they had Wallkill, they had Ravina, and now they got this nice break about 10 days after that Ravina game. And they play Kisaki at Columbia Green on Sunday night.
Yep.
It's there's no Patroon championship this year. If there's no league championship game like there has been, or there was, recent years. So this is the only time that they play each other all year, at least the regular season. So it's natural to want to look ahead to that. I'm sure Kisaki's kind of dealing with the same thing. They had 5-6 players at that game at Ravina, just watching, and all in the blue gear. So I'm sure that they're kind of fighting the same sort of thing. But that Ravina game is just your good, classic, old-fashioned trap game. Catskill had 1 loss. Ravina had 1 win, I think. But 1 loss in the Patroon versus 1 win in the Colonial is not quite 1 loss versus 1 win. That's a varying levels of Division I. Like when you have a MAC school playing a Big East school or something like that, it's kind of that. It's a similar sort of vibe, because the schedule, Ravina's schedule, their losses are to Catholic High and Albany Academy and Chalmont, and I think Ravina was down 4 after 3 quarters to Chalmont, so it's not like they're just total chop liver. But those losses were to those kinds of teams and holy names, so on and so forth. Like, that's a You know, you can just look at that record and think, and kind of look past it. It's a different league. It's a different level league. It's a different kind of opponent that they see. So there's a lot more than meets the eye. And Catskill very, very, very nearly walked out of there with a loss. They led most of the game. They were unable to create separation. Just couldn't string together enough positive results. Too many droughts. Inability sometimes to, take advantage of Ravenna turnovers or whatever it may be. I also think Ravenna's personnel lined up relatively well with Catskills, where they have a forward in the middle in Hayden Wolf that isn't quite the same level explosive athlete as Ava Edmond for Catskill, but she's big enough and she's athletic enough and she's she's definitely everything enough to make it so that she's not that Ava just can't walk her way to like 24 points and 22 rebounds. So I think Ava had 12 and 15 in that game, but it was one that she had to earn. But they were up most of the game and then they weren't. And Ravenna took a 3-point lead with a minute left. And the way that game was played, I think the final was 40-35 with like an offensive explosion at the end of it. So a 3-point game or a 5-point game felt more like a 13-point game. But when they needed, Catskill was able to gut out 8-0 in the last 57 seconds of that game or whatever it was, created a couple turnovers, hit enough at the free throw line. Finally, they'd struggled to execute in the half court throughout the game. Finally executed, got a back cut for a layup. So in that last minute, they were able to string it together so they can, kind of pull a Houdini and escape with that one. So that's trap games happen. That was probably like the most striking trap game that I've seen this year as far as all of the stars aligning. But, if they play like that against Coxsackie, they are in severe trouble. I don't expect them to play like that against Coxsackie.
Well, here's the $1 million question that always gets asked, not necessarily about high school basketball. Well, in certain instances, yes, but that's more towards sectional time. But it's always something that gets brought up in major league sports when in the postseason, typically when like one team gets an easy sweep and the other team is coming out of like a gritty 6 or 7 game series. The question always is, how did the team that took care of their business early handle their extra time off? So here's the question I'm going to pose here. Coxsackie has played a very consistent schedule as far as like the space in between games, nothing too big. I think the biggest space they had was, it looks like it was a week between their game, between 2 home games against Lansingburg on December 21st. And then obviously the Christmas break right there. And then they played Johnstown the 28th. So it was a week, but it was a normal week of spacing because of the holiday. So you have Catskill on the one hand. They're going to be coming in on 10 days rest essentially against Coxsackie on Sunday. Meanwhile, Coxsackie has since played 2 games after the Ravenna game with Catskill. They hosted Greenville the night after the Ravenna Catskill game, which they won handily actually. And then they just took care of Cobleskill Richmondville last night, Tuesday the 21st, also handily at home. If you're a coach, so we're just going to put this in generic terms for this. and you have a big game in the grand scheme of sectional seating and getting a conference crown. Do you prefer the way Catskill's schedule is lined up going in, or do you prefer having that consistency of a game every 3, 4, 5 days that Koksaki is going in with?
I think humans are creatures of habit. So if you're able to have a relatively consistent schedule that you can kind of set your clock to, which I know is difficult in upstate New York, sometimes Mother Nature decides to move your clock a little bit, clean your clock.
Or have a wind chill below 0 for 3 days straight?
Yeah, I wonder if my car is going to start today. But I think humans are creatures of habit. So if you're able to have that sort of consistent schedule, I do think that plays to your benefit. The one thing that would trump that is, if you're like kind of Catskill playing wall kill sort of thing, if you're able to fit in and not, if you're a good team that wants to get challenged, it should be getting challenged. If you're able to fit in a non-league, non-traditional sort of matchup that doesn't fit your clockwork schedule, that trumps out. I'll give me that. If my team is good enough to play, to have the opportunity to play in Amsterdam on the holiday break or play in, the Josh Palmer or something like that over holiday break, and then give me that opportunity. But outside of those sorts of particular situations, yeah, I mean, I like the thought of a consistent schedule where I just think that humans are creatures of habit, and being able to develop a routine, I think puts you in a better position. I also don't think that if you have 10 days off, like this is it's in a sense it's probably good for Coach Quinn and Catskill. Like if they have kids that are banged up or anything like that, they're able to get them a few days off their feet, or give them a couple lighter practices or whatever it may be. But then at the same time, also keeping your players' attention for probably, they played Thursday, and we'll say if you go Friday, Saturday, natural would be Friday, Saturday, we'll say Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We'll say you take off Monday. Just because you can't do 7 days in a row and you play on a Sunday night.
Mm-hmm.
But you have probably 7 practices in between. Keeping your players' attention for 7 practices without a game is not the easiest thing in the world. That's why teams, after a couple weeks of the season, like they want to see, they want to scrimmage somebody. They're sick of looking at each other and playing against each other. They want to go play against somebody else. So, yeah, personally, I would be more of the consistent. Like, I would prefer the consistent schedule: Tuesday, Friday, Monday, Thursday, and Wednesday, Saturday. Whatever it is, just kind of that steady game on, practice, game, day off, practice, game on. There's exceptions to it, but yeah, I think that there's good things about this break for Catskill. There's also challenges in preparation. You're just keeping your players' attention, and I don't think anybody needs 10 days to game plan for anyone. You don't need 7 practices to prep for a particular team. So yeah, there's give and take. I would prefer the consistent schedule, but
All right, moving on to Class A. And we'll just start at the top, man. BP, they just keep chugging along. They take care of business at Scotia handily. They, like I mentioned back last week, they had a 3-game stretch of the epic Northway to Queensbury Glens Falls Trail. They started off with a very resounding win at South Glens Falls back on Thursday the 16th. They're going to turn around and play twice in 3 days now. They'll go to Queensbury, which you'll be at tomorrow night, Thursday the 23rd, and then they'll have a Saturday afternoon matinee at 12:30 at Glens Falls. Before then turning around and having, actually it's really 3 and 5. They're going to be hosting Amsterdam next Monday. So it'll be a case of 3 games in 5 days after having a week off following that win at South Glens Falls last Thursday. So, but it's also a case of where this team had roughly 10 days off or so after they went to Utica back during the Christmas break. They beat New Hartford at the Nexus Center on December 27th, and then they didn't play again till January 6th, and they've rattled off 4 very convincing wins in a row. So, I mean, they've handled the quote-unquote extended break well before, but it's a little different, no offense to Gloversville, a little different this time around because you're turning around and going to a team like Queensbury who, like we've been discussing through the year, they seem to have grown into the familiarity of the players, and they've gelled together now. Shea Canavan has been healthy and doing her thing recently, so it's going to be a challenge, I think, here for BP going on the road to Queensbury, which is a team that they had a defensive battle against second game of the season, only winning 38-33 at home against back on December 5th. So BP definitely looking at a challenge here these next 6 days, basically.
Yeah, I mean, this is Thursday. Tomorrow, Thursday, is the biggest challenge of their regular season period. I don't think it's particularly close. Not only is it the only team that played you close the first time around with Queensbury, but it's also this Broad Albin. There's not much that can get to this Broad Albin team, but Queensbury's got 2 things that tend to give them issues. Shea Canavan, and not Shea gives them issues, but like that kind of player gives Broad Albin issues. They have tremendous length, great, just big time height, but tremendous length defensively with the Perrys and with Molly Russum and so on and so forth. And they're able to just kind of squeeze the life out of guards that are not just good enough, but also athletic enough and strong enough to be able to carve their way into the middle of that. The way to beat that zone, the way to beat Broad Albin and their power defensively is to get into the teeth of it and to get in the middle of it. We can talk about that all you want. Doing it is an entirely different thing. And teams have found that out the hard way for the last 3 years. Very few are able to consistently get into the teeth of it, be able to create passing angles around that length. Catholic High was able to do it, when they were in A last year, and they played each other in the I think regular season finale going into sectionals last year. They were able to do it. Holy Names even, last year, like Holy Names even had some trouble with it. They just were able to win, largely because of, and make it to the finals largely just because of the shot making of Sophia Bologna. But, the only other person that they've really played over the last 3 years been able to do that is Shea. Just get into the middle of the zone, make them collapse, and make plays. So she causes problems for them. And if you have a stable of athletic guards that can pressure the ball, that can cause issues for Broad Albin as well. Queensbury is that. They thrive off creating turnovers. Broad Albin can be susceptible to turning the ball over against pressure. So this is unquestionably their biggest challenge of the regular season. So that's I've haven't meant to just kind of push. I have meant to push them off on my schedule. I haven't meant to push them off so much on this podcast because I feel like a lot of times when we discuss Broad Albin, I kind of bring up this game, or like, well, yeah, they're crushing this team because they're supposed to crush this team. I haven't meant to push them off like that, but that's just have kind of been waiting to see what round 2 of this, of this game or of this matchup, how it show. I already, I know that Queensbury has grown clearly with some of their results recently. This will show the growth of Broad Albin. So I'm looking forward to being there. I've been waiting and waiting to watch them until this game just because I'm not getting anything out of watching them turn somebody over 38 times that I know they're going to turn over 38 times. And so these are the ones that they get to see where they're at. We all get to see where they're at, and they win, lose, whatever, like they should get something out of these 32 minutes.
In the meantime, everybody underneath BP is kind of beating themselves up in a way. Not literally like against each other, but just in different ways. Chalmont, they played back-to-back games last week, defeating Ichabod Crane at home handily before losing a tight 2-point game, which it was one of those things where if you turned the Niskayuna-Chalmont game off at halftime, you would have assumed it ending one way, and the way it did end up finishing was completely the opposite, because Niskayuna was handling business in that first half. I want to say it was like a 30-13 at halftime, something in that ballpark, 30-15.
Yeah, I think it was 15, but they had got it up to 17 or 19 late the first half.
Yeah, and then just Chalmont very Chalmont-esque in a way. And, and JVH had that team just chipping away. Just they wouldn't go away. They end up taking the 2-point loss, but I mean, that was a game that was up for grabs in those final moments, but Niskayuna just found a way to survive and win that game. So that's one part of it. Then you have Holy Names on the other side of it, who takes care of business. After they start off slow against LaSalle Tuesday, but they figured things out, and they end up winning by 20 or so against LaSalle on Tuesday, and then show up very flat, and that's putting it mildly, against Catholic Central on TV Friday night. I'm going to not bring up how the game started. I'm just going to, if you want to know bad enough, go look it up. I have too much respect for Gigs to talk about that, but they end up losing a tough one. That was not a good look on that TV game Friday night against Catholic Central. So, like, we'll address the third team in the mix in a second, because that team's a whole conversation in itself. But you look at those two teams specifically, Chalmont and Holy Names. Where do we where's our feel at this point for those two teams? Because on the one side you have Chalmont, who isn't big, but they're aggressive, they're tenacious, they're gritty. On the other hand, you have Holy Names, which is it's essentially either going to be ground and pound back down with Maggie Vollmer, or a lot of jump shooting with Savaka and Bellinger and Murray. What's our feel at this point as we're a month out from sectional seeding with these two teams right now?
So the first thing that I would say is going back to, I'll very briefly bring up the TV game, right? I know what the final score was. I actually don't know how it got to that point. Like, I didn't look at the breakdown. I just, I know what the final was. I saw the, some of the individual scoring, but I know it was on TV. I didn't DVR it. I didn't decide to go back and watch the stream after Colony Shaker. Why? Because I figured that game was going to be a 40, 50-point game. It's a bad matchup. Basketball is a game of matchups, and it's nothing against holy names, but just over and over again to talk about basketball is truly, it's a game of matchups. That's a terrible matchup for holy names. Holy names could then turn around and beat somebody that could give Catholic High a game, depending on how matchups break down. But just that bruising level of physicality, just it's a very forward style that Catholic High plays, and teams with that sort of forward style, they're not good for holy names. So you saw, Academy is not that level of forward style by any means, but you saw Academy kind of play a little, closer to that forward style of play, downhill style of play against holy names in the second half at Siena, and you saw what it turned into. So that's a bad matchup. I don't know. I don't know what the discussions are and when what the process is for decisions being made. I was standing on the baseline at Colony Shaker wondering why that wasn't the TV game. But it's nothing against Catholic High and Holy Names, but I couldn't figure that out. But again, I'm not in those rooms. I don't make those decisions. I'm not invited in those rooms. So, I'll just sit here and do 84 feet and upstate 20s and run showcases and stuff. I'll just do what I do. But, I just knew that was that's a bad matchup for Holy Names. Shalmont is not a bad matchup for Holy Names. They don't play that way. They don't play that style. Holy Names actually creates a difficult matchup for Shalmont with Maggie Vollmer, and it's kind of a pick your poison sort of thing. We talked about that weeks ago when they played about a month back when I was at that game, and it was kind of a team effort for Holy Names. It really was a pick your poison. Shalmont hung around, but it was Maggie early, and then it was guards like Lizzie Blanche, Julia Viglucci, so on and so forth, and then it was Maggie again late. So I think that Holy Names isn't perfect. They've had their up moments and their down moments, but I look at the results of that game, and I didn't really bat an eye at it, where I know others did. Like, I had heard, people kind of bringing up that final score and just kind of how the game went. When I was at Colony Shaker, I don't know. I didn't really. It didn't move the needle for me quite as much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, they're settling into those 3-4 range NA, right? And that result didn't move the needle for me like maybe it did for some people. And then Shalmont, right? And I wrote this down because I watched a stream of that Shalmont Niski game. And what's my favorite word?
Consistency.
Oh, Jesus. I'm sorry I'm a broken record, but holy God. Both teams, I think, Niski and Shalmont. I know Niski's in Double A, and we're going to get to Double A momentarily, but both teams, I think, you see different versions of them depending on which and not just in this game, but just in any game pretty much throughout the season. You see different versions of them depending on whether you turn the stream on when it says 12 minutes versus 32 minutes versus 57 minutes. You see some very completely different things. So Shalma at its best, dangerous. They have those dry spells as well. So it's just sounds cliche. I don't like using cliche terms all the time, but it is just kind of what version shows up.
All right. The team that I kept as a conversation by itself for Class A. Everybody should probably know who it is. Albany Academy, because it was a very mixed bag of a 2-2 week, but all 4 games provided the same model of issues, even if they had Alex Leonard on the court for these 4 games. Well, I mean, they had it for part of the first one, but, well, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So they come out and lose at Catholic Central last Tuesday. They get a bounce back win over LaSalle Friday at home by 25, which is the first full game they had without Alex Leonard, who's out right now with a wrist injury. The hope right now, the wishful thinking is her being back for senior night, which is next Friday, the 31st. More likely, probably looking at sometime around the Holy Names Part 2 matchup on the 7th. But that's the time range they're looking at, basically. The wishful part is senior night, the 31st. More likely around the Holy Names game, maybe as late as the second game against Catholic Central on the 11th. But that's the whole conversation in another bag for later. And then they turn around after the LaSalle game. They have back-to-back games in the UND Jugglers Classic, which they lose to Aquinas, had a chance to tie in the final minute, end up losing by 5. A very good, nothing wrong about losing to Aquinas, by the way. A top 10 AA school, Lauren Green, so there's nothing wrong with that. And then Sunday, they end up winning by 4. It was a case where Maggie Warpus went in at 996 for Chenango Forks. So the 1,000-point mark for her career was done within like the first minute of the game. And I remember I remember talking to Kat about this. He was like, once it was done, I was like, okay, like it was in a sense that it was really good for both teams, honestly, when you think about it, because like, all right, it's done, it's out of the way. Now it can just focus on the last 31 minutes of the game. And for Academy, it worked out for them. They end up with a 4-point win. But again, like I teased the start of this with, it's 2 consistent issues with this Academy team right now. And we saw this a lot in the first half of the Holy Names game at Siena. And I'm assuming you'd agree with Cap in that you probably saw this Saturday against Aquinas. It's giving up second chance points, and it's turnovers. Those are the 2 main things that are hurting Academy, where right now, yeah, they're 10-4, but they could have very easily won that Columbia game. You add in the fact they gave Columbia 27 free throws, but still, those were big factors in the Columbia loss. Those were very big factors in the Shaker game, especially in the fourth quarter at Shaker. And they were big factors in the loss to Aquinas this past weekend. So, it's an Academy team where, yes, they're 10-4 overall. They'll be more than likely the number 2 seed as things stand right now in the sectionals for Class A. But at the same time, there's lost opportunities for them in 3 of those 4 losses, and they could easily be sitting, 13-1 if they didn't have those issues that I mentioned.
I just changed my vantage point. If you saw that on the YouTube. On the YouTube. But
Get a little hot in the office?
yeah, it's getting a little warm. A little toasty. So figured I would just move around a little bit. Yeah, there's no shame in losing to with Alex or without Alex. There's no shame in losing to Aquinas, and as much as they want that Catholic high game, there's no shame in that either. They're very good, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Against Catholic High, yes, they gave up a lot of second chance opportunities. Everybody gives up second chance. You want to be perfect in that regard, and I think it bothers you a little bit more when that's probably like a main talking point in practice going up to a game when you're playing them. You got to keep them off the offensive glass, and then they get on the offensive glass and you just kind of, this is what we worked on, this is what we talked about. They do it to everybody, so that's I know that's not like consolation for especially for a good team, but that's something that they kind of do to everybody. I don't know. I feel like not to keep bringing up like my upstate 20 stuff, but that's fresh in my mind because I just did it. I've had Academy at number 1 in my Class A rankings since the start. They lost twice this week. They lost, they lost Catholic High. They lost to AQ. The biggest one out of those 4 games that was kind of like a just the things that make you go situation, especially without me being there to see it, was being down by 10 at half to Shenango Forks, and they came back and won the game. They won by 4, but being minus 10 at the break was a little bit interesting. And for the record, I just side note, going back to that 1,000-point thing where Maggie went in with 996, she would be one of the rare exceptions that I would sit and watch. I would be there for. I wasn't there. I was there the day before when she went from 971 and 996. That kid's an exception. That's somebody that, she was 29 from 1,000. That didn't change her approach to the game against Notre Dame. 4 away from 1,000. Sure, didn't change her approach against Academy or change anything about how she played, and didn't change away how anybody around her played. So that would be kind of an exception. That's just a mental makeup. She's a rare one. But yeah, that's I was a little surprised to see they were down 10 at half to Forks, but that's also it's Alex Leonard hasn't been putting up quite the scoring numbers that she did last year. I don't think, feels like it's been a drop. I don't have the numbers exact in front of me. But she still is, regardless of whether she scores 20 points or 9 points or whatever, she is a primary presence. She's a presence on people's scouting reports. She has a high amount of usage, whether it's not even necessarily shot attempts, but the amount the ball is in her hands, the amount of possessions the ball sees her hands, or you run action for her or through her. So that changes a little bit on the offensive end. But so they lost those 2 games, and part of it was also teams that I had behind them also lost. Like Iroquois out in Section 6, they lost. Notre Dame lost to Aquinas just like Academy did. Pearl River down in Section 1, they lost, albeit to Walter Panis, who's really good. And it was a close game, but like I couldn't move Academy down. They lost twice. I still felt like I couldn't move them down. Because I'm like, what have they done to make me drop them? Take on a really good schedule, play some really good teams. I'm not gonna penalize if you're if you lay an egg against those sorts of teams. Like, okay, now we're talking. But you go out there, you're competitive. Again, Aquinas is very good. You don't have Alex Leonard. Granted, Aquinas wasn't at full strength either. They didn't have Jade Harvey, and Jade's a nice player, but I think Alex is more of a prominent presence on the academy team than Jade is at AQ. So you're competitive. You kind of, offensively, you've got next woman up. Emily Thornton had a nice weekend. Yeah, I mean, they got their stuff to work on. But everybody does. And I think what happened is they just had they've challenged themselves as much as possible. And they haven't, like, as far as signature wins go, they haven't quite got over the hump. They weren't able to get over the hump of Columbia. They weren't able to get over Shaker. They weren't able to get over AQ. Catholic High was the only one that really thumped them.
Mm-hmm.
They're there with all these other top teams. Catholic High is the only one that really thumped them. And I think that's kind of your turning point sort of game. Like, all right, how about it? Like, how about it are we really? But I don't know. I'm not waving the flag or nervous or whatever about that group. I think it's a really challenging week. And it's one you put that on the schedule. Like, I'm expecting them to go 2-2 with at Catholic High, LaSalle, Aquinas, and then whoever they play between Forks and Notre Dame. I anticipate them going 2-2. So, I don't know. I'm not jumping off a cliff on this one.
Yeah, understood. All right, moving to Double A, and let's start with a school that we mentioned briefly in the Class A discussion, because Niskayuna, they had two sneaky wins, I guess we could put it. They survived at Shelmont, and then they survived at Boston Spa on Friday. And Niskayuna, now that they're, they're not, they're the kind of team where they're not gonna, they're not gonna come out like a Columbia or Catholic Central and, blow you away. But they're a very athletic team. They have some good length. Yes, they're young, but I mean the talent is certainly there. Where they could cause a problem or two for a number of teams when we get further down the road. And right now they're I believe they're sitting at like 9-5 overall, right in the mix of like the middle of the pack in Double A. And now they have a schedule coming up where they get a real big challenge on Friday when they host Columbia. And then the remainder of the schedule, they'll be at Bethlehem, which
that's one I circle.
That's good. That's a coin flip game, if you ask me. They'll have a non-league game. Well, at least it's listed non-game, but I thought Burnt Hills was in the Suburban, but I guess not.
They are. Maybe it was just scheduled as. Maybe they just picked them up a league opponent again as a non-league game, like if they both needed a game.
Possibly. So they'll play Burnt, and then really the real gauntlet is going to be those last three games of their schedule to end the regular season. They'll have, luckily, they'll have the first two at home. They'll have Shaker at home, and they'll have Averill Park at home. And then they'll have to go visit Albany High to wrap up the season. But I mean, this Siniski team, where I would say 3-3 down the stretch is feasible. Honestly, I think they can, put themselves in a position where they'll be roughly around 12-8 or so going into sectionals. But still, this is a team that they have young athletes. It's clear who the team runs through, essentially, and could cause some trouble potentially for teams.
Yeah, I circle, and granted, this won't matter as far as who gets home court because it'll be on a neutral site no matter what. But I circle that Niski Bethlehem game likely as like that one in particular, unless there's some weird stuff that happens of like upset wins or surprise losses. That one is probably a big determining factor as to who's the 4 and who's the 5 in Double A. Unless Queensbury gets thrown into that mix, which if they beat Broad Albin, they win out. I don't maybe. They get thrown into that. But right now, the way I look at it, where you've got Columbia and Catholic High and Averill Park, and then it's right now it's probably Bethlehem 4, Niski 5. I know Bethlehem's got an early season win over Niski. But at the Averill Park tournament, but that's one that that I circle. But yeah, it's a group that ebbs and flows, peaks and valleys to this team, but they're a dangerous group. They're the athleticism of Sky Lunier and Sierra Gonzalez. That duo, just from a pure athleticism standpoint, is up kind of in that same sort of ilk as like an Olivia Landy kind of athlete, where they just game-breaking athleticism, their ability to turn the ball, make opposing guards turn the ball over. When I've watched Niski a couple times, they've run flashes of a 1-3-1 with a Sierra up top, just kind of being an athlete, a la Liverpool with a Bria Cunningham up top. But they're able to create that sort of frenetic style of play and get up and down the court, pace and space. Is a dangerous group. And yeah, this is one where they're a younger group that I do think shows their youth a decent amount, just with those kind of peaks and valleys sometimes, even just in that Shalmont game where they came out like gangbusters, and then they're things get hairy for them sometimes. I think decision making gets hairy. I think shot quality can get, a little questionable. But I think they do show their youth. But it's a group of kids pretty much are all going to be back next year, and some of them the year after with Sky and Natalie Birmingham. So yeah, I don't want to say that I've been surprised with how they've done this year, because I don't think that's the right word. I believe that they had the talent to have some success, but I've been I think to this point they've achieved what I felt like, like the goal of what they would be able to achieve. And now let's see, these last 3 weeks with the dog days of the season, can they turn this into a, as you said, like a 12-8 4 seed sort of thing, or does it go the other way? Or we'll see. But it's a potential group, like it's an exciting group with a good amount of potential, and they've shown some pretty solid flashes of that throughout the winter.
And meanwhile, on the other side of it, because we mentioned Iskuna, might as well mention Their next opponent, Columbia, winners of 12 in a row, 13-1 overall. Had a very front-loaded schedule in the month of December. They've played 3 games in the month of January and are going to be coming in that Niskayuna game with a full week off for the second time in a row, like they did against Averill Park last week. Ended up being fine, getting that win by 18 over AP. And basically, it's a 3-week in a row trend for them. They came with a week off against AP. They'll be on a week off going into the Niskay game, and then next Friday, the 31st, will be their next game after that, when they go to Albany. So, just you enjoy the fruits of your labor by getting a little extra time to maybe lick any wounds you didn't have time to take care of, with that hectic December schedule. And it's as the popular TikTok sound goes, it's like a reward. So that's how Columbia can look at things right now, the way their schedule lays out. And I gotta tell you, man, I'm not sure what to make of how that Albany game will go next Friday. We could talk more about that next week. And obviously they also have Shaker come up on the schedule as their penultimate game of the regular season on February 11th. But other than that, they're a train, man, and I don't know if there's anyone that can really stop them on the tracks they're currently setting themselves on.
Yeah, I mean they've passed every test in front of them. They're not done with the tests. I was having this conversation on Friday before the Shaker Colony game, as they were probably warming up against Averill Park. They still, and this is part of the suburban council, right? You're generally not going to go too long without another test. And they've played Averill Park, they've played Shen, they played Colony. Well, they haven't played Shaker yet, and they haven't played Albany High yet. So, they're not out of the woods in the regular season, but just it's been, they're riding a high. Yeah, you can tell they're they found that consistency that I've talked about 1.5 million times with them. Just continuing to pass tests. The Averill Park one, probably good in the sense of, without me being there, but just kind of looking at the box and kind of how that went, where they're able to jump on them. Averill Park is able to respond in the third, cutting it back into, I think it was a 14-point game at half, and then might have been a 2-possession game going into the fourth quarter. But how Columbia was able to blow back away in the later stages to kind of win that one going away. So just continuing to pass tests. Yeah, I mean, their biggest challenge with how they play, their style and their personnel versus the personnel of another team. I think their biggest challenge of the regular season is still ahead with Shaker. That's the team I look at. So probably this is the most difficult matchup for them. But at least after they play them on, what'd you say, February 11th?
Yes.
Yeah, they won't have to deal with Shaker again. So, there's no opportunity for those two to cross paths. So, yeah, I mean, they've found the steadiness. Especially in the last 2 or 3 weeks, where it appears like Kendall Ouimet has come on a little bit more with the shooting stroke, where she's had, the shot was a little up and down in the first few weeks. She had her moments. It was a little bit streaky, but the last few weeks she's been knocking it down with more consistency. So, they've found their three. They're getting up into the 60s and 70s on teams. Like, tough. It's a tough team. Tough out.
Then we get to wrap up Double A with starting the conversation about the Rose Classic downstate. As the Rose Classic Super Jam, there were 5 Section 2 teams that took part throughout the course of that holiday weekend event. 4 of them took part in a pair of games on Saturday and Sunday. 3 of them from Double A. The 3 Double A teams were Amsterdam, Mohan, and Catholic Central. Amsterdam went 2-0. They beat Kip New York City College Prep by 12, and then Manhattan Center by 6. Then we saw, give me 1 second here while I pull up Catholic Central. I believe they went 2-0 as well, if I remember.
Yeah, they beat New Dorp. They beat a pair of Staten Island teams. They beat New Dorp, and that was close to a 20-point game. And then on Sunday, which was kind of a headlining game, they played St. Joseph by the Sea, led by Angelina Hodgins, who's committed to Northwestern. They won that game, I think, 67-59 or something around that range.
Yep. And then Mohanison, they also got a pair of victories, beating Thomas Jefferson, almost doubling them up, actually, 49-25. And then they defeated August Martin Sunday afternoon, 52-23. So the 3 AA teams going 6-0 across the weekend. And specifically for Catholic Central, you add in those two wins at home against Academy, Albany Academy, and Holy Names. That's a hell of a week for Catholic Central, and a really nice showing for the Section 2 AA teams downstate.
Yeah, good showing for Section 2 with the Rose. The Rose might need to get back a little bit more to a point where they're valuing our Section 2 teams and getting, having some better competition. C is a nice team for Catholic High to play against, but I would have, as much as I love seeing our Section 2 teams have success, I think they went 9-0 total.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. I'd like to see, and we'll talk about the AAA stuff in a second, but yeah, I think that there could have been maybe a couple better matchups along that, but that's neither here nor there. But yeah, I mean, that's the Catholic High just doing what I expected them to do. Really, it's just they've grown throughout the year. They've taken, there's not that many opportunities for a team like that to get tested in the regular season because you play, you're required to play like 80% of your games in the Colonial Council or 70% of your games in Colonial Council. So you're only going to get a couple of reasonable games out of that if you're Catholic High. So with the remaining schedule, what they've had, they've done everything they can to utilize some different environments, get tested. They look better now than they did at the beginning of the year, which is what you want. They've certainly missed Ella DeBacco in a sense because it hurts their depth not being able to have like a Mia Rodriguez would have been a super sub for him, and she's in that starting role because of Ella's injury, but at the same time, the progress that Mia made in the off season, which isn't really an off season for these kids, the progress that she made spring, summer, and fall allowed her to kind of step right in where they still have that complete 5. They don't have any liabilities on the court. Dior's been tremendous, and I think that she plays even better. And you saw this early in the year when they beat Shaker, and you saw it against Academy too. I think that she plays better under the bright lights. The big games or the ones that are perceived big games with the local interest or the ones against the a strong individual matchup that we're making comparisons to or with. I think that Dior not necessarily saves her best for those, but I think that she elevates her game in those moments, which is that's an art to be able to rise to the occasion like that. And the front court is impossible to match up with.
Trying to get shit out of there.
I think one way of putting it would be, and this again is not meant to be said in a bad way. Maybe she defers a little more in a way, like she plays more of the true form of a point guard. In those other games,
she always competes.
right, she always competes, but I think
it's when she feels like it's time, like, all right, it's got to be like. I think that Dior has a good sense about her as far as when it's her time,
right.
Which I talk about that with stars all the time, as far as especially ones that aren't just volume shooters. Because if the ones that you see that are volume shooters, every time is their time. But ones that aren't that, just there's an art to having the sense about them of, all right, now it's got to be me. This is an out of area example. You might be familiar with Jackie Pittick.
Yes.
South Jefferson, Watertown area. Now
Yes.
a junior starting point guard at Marist. Jackie was the best at this, where it was, in her heart of hearts, she was a 15-point, 6 rebound, 9 assist, like 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio kid. That was just like the Army general. Military runs in the family with her. But Mallory Heiss from Hilton, same sort of thing. She's in her heart of hearts, it's what she is. But they had such a great sense of looking at who they're playing against, looking around at their teammates, and like, I got to get 30 today.
Which is kind of what Mallory did in the state semis last year.
Yes. No way that game happens. No way that game unfolds the way that it did if Mallory didn't do what she did in the first 6 minutes.
Yep.
She gave the rest of her teammates confidence by basically going one-on-one for 5 or 6 minutes and, ISO, mid-range Mal. She's in double digits, and the other play, they had other kids that could play on that team, but they needed that confidence. And because of how Mal started that game, which isn't her, she's not the one that in her heart of hearts wants to go shoot 25 times. But in that moment, it's like, all right, it's got to be me at the jump. And it was her at the jump. And that set the stage for the confidence and everybody else being able to, be in their best light to produce. Jackie Pittick was tremendous with that, where she didn't necessarily want to be that, but playing against a certain kind of team. And, she was literally be like, probably at least got to be 32 today. It's probably got to be 8 a quarter. Dior she's not scoring 30 something. She's the players around her are so good that I don't think she ever really has to do that, but she's got that sense about her as far as Catholic High against Academy on Tuesday, very early in the game, but still 3-minute scoreless stretch, half dozen, and not necessarily flat, but kind of like predictable empty possessions. Academy very briefly takes the lead. I forget who scored. It might have been Eva Gito that scored to give them like 7-6 or 7-5 or something, just early. But it was just Academy takes their first little lead. Catholic High's had a few blah, whatever, throw them in the trash sort of possessions in a row. Dior makes sure that that next possession doesn't happen. Slides behind a ball screen, bangs a three. All right, we're back, and we're back on good graces here. A catalyst in that second quarter run. She was probably the third or fourth leading scorer in that game, but if you were at that game, you're thinking about Dior, and then you're thinking about the fact that Akari Gatti was really active. But your Dior at 12 points felt like she had 30 points worth of impact. Just can't say enough about how much I enjoy her game. But yeah, I mean, Catholic High is just, and they are who we thought they were, and just kind of continuing to handle business. They have like a very grown sense about them, adultish, womanish sense about them. Just whether it's the physicality or just the compete level, the maturity, the approach. I like that team.
All right, moving to Triple A. First team we'll start with is Shenendahowa, because they had a more unique week than some of the others in that they're coming off a loss at Columbia on the 10th. They were able to ultimately take care of business at home against Niskayuna by 9. Then they go and handle Saratoga Springs on Friday night, and then that was the first part of a 3-3 for them as well. A little different though than a couple of their AAA counterparts, as they end up going west instead of south. They went out and played in the Section 3 area of Syracuse, and actually got a win over Liverpool. I know Bria Cunningham was didn't really play much, if at all, I believe, if I remember correctly. In that Saturday game. But still, I mean, a win over Liverpool is a win over Liverpool. You'll take it. And then Sunday, Shen had a lead against the Fighting Seichens of Cicero North Syracuse. But CNS was able to ultimately come back and get that win over Shenendahowa 64-59. So, all in all, you look at the schedule, and if you were given that 4-game slate and you were told in advance you were going to go 3-1, I mean, you don't like the way you got the one loss, but I think at the same time, if you're Joe Murphy, you kind of go, I'll take that. I'll take 3-1.
Yeah. Very, very nearly 4-0. I know they had a double-digit lead big lead after one at CNS, and double digits after 3. And if you're thinking, if somebody tells you you're going to go 3-1, you might not. If you're Shen, you might not necessarily think that's the order in which it happens. You might think you beat CNS and you lose to Liverpool.
Right.
But still, they're chugging along. I've liked how this group has kind of come together this year, and it's one, I don't remember if we talked about this at all during the preview, but my thought with this Shen group that could be a positive in comparison to maybe a negative of the previous couple years, although people had their questions about this year's group coming in. I thought the downfall of the Shen teams of the last couple of years is they peaked early. I thought they looked really good beginning of December. Like, they looked better than everybody else early in the season, looked like they were in mid-season form. By the time they get to the Amsterdam showcase, they're world beaters. But they didn't really get any better from that point, because they couldn't really get any better from that point. That was as good as they could possibly get. And then not that the wheels fell off, but there was, just kind of like that plateauing. When I watched this team play in the fall, just like a Notre Dame, not a team camp, but just a little jamboree shindig that Coach Snyder put together. Or I see him at the beginning of the year. The last thing that I would have said about this year's Shen team was they looked like they were in midseason form. And they looked like they were in October, and they looked like they were in October, which I thought was a good thing, because I wasn't looking at that team thinking, I don't know how much better they can get. They look great now, but I don't know how much better they can get. I was watching them thinking, they can look a lot better than they do now. And they've had more of that natural progression of just developing and looking better and finding some bench moments and a little bit of productivity, and finding, even though it's a really balanced five, I think also finding some kind of roles, and maybe not so much a pecking order, but establishing just role stuff, establishing some more go-to type pieces within that five. And I think that they've done a nice job kind of rounding into form this year. That is a good Abria or no Abria. I know Abria Cunningham changes so much. She's one of the most valuable players in the state for her team at any classification, to any level. So not having Abria at full strength, I know she did play in that game, but was kind of in and out, recovering from illness, I believe. Like, she was out when they played whoever they played in the middle of the week last week, like Fayetteville Manlius or somebody like that. She changes a ton as far as what they're able to do, but that's still a very good team regardless. Like, Gia Kinsey's a load to deal with for anybody. Winning pedigree, winning coach, unique looking team, great athleticism. So, beating Liverpool with Abria at any strength is that's a big time quality win. It was my biggest takeaway from that, I know, branching away from section 2, but my biggest takeaway from that whole weekend was that's a heck of a weekend for CNS. And with that being my biggest takeaway, because CNS beat Cardinal O'Hara by 20 the day before. And they match up really well with O'Hara. They're big, they're physical, they got numerous bodies that they can throw at Kyla Hayes, make her step out, initiate offense from further away from the basket. They can try to, where she is able to grind and be physical with pretty much everybody she plays against, they can kind of grind and be physical with her. So it's a good matchup for CNS. But the fact that my biggest takeaway from that whole weekend at Best of New York is, wow, really good weekend for CNS. That probably says something good about Shen.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, oh, wow, they were able to get a win against Shen at home. So that probably says something good about Shen.
All right, let's get into the only game that you covered last week that we haven't touched on yet. It was a heavyweight battle between Shaker and Colony at Colony. Both teams were coming in off wins in the league. Colony had beaten Albany High. Shaker had beaten Bethlehem. Both of those games were on Tuesday. So they were both coming in off victories in the Suburban. And it was what you'd expect. It was a knockdown, drag out, heavyweight affair. And Shaker was able to get the tough win on the road against their city rival. The North Colony counterpart took this chapter of the battle against the South Colony representative in Colony Central. What were your takeaways specifically from that game on Friday night?
Shaker, both teams probably have something positive to take away from it. Shaker gets a road win where they kind of had to grind it out. They probably feel like they didn't play at their best. And we look at that like tail of the tape personnel sort of matchup, and the first, the natural first thing to bring up is Shaker's size, and that potentially being an advantage. Colony made sure that that wasn't an advantage. Shaker wasn't really able to take advantage of that and use that. So, Shaker finding a way to win on the road, they feel like they probably didn't play their best, and they weren't, they didn't get like big nights out of their front court. They can look at that and think that it's promising. Colony, and honest, this is a little bit more the way that I took it. I thought Colony had a game plan that could work for them, that they executed particularly well, and they just didn't make shots. They just it was probably the worst shooting night it'll probably go down as the worst shooting night of the year for them. And it wasn't bad shot quality. They got the sort of shots that I would assume that they would want, and they just didn't make shots. They probably shot 20, I would say maybe 20% from the field. Maybe 12 to 15% from three. They made 3 threes, and I would, being there, I didn't count, but I would guess that they attempted like 20 to 20, low to mid 20s. They got decent looks. They didn't convert. They got a bunch of makeable rim attempts. It wasn't like Shaker was being overly physical with them and pounding them into the floor or into the matting behind the basket or anything. They got makeable rim attempts, didn't make them. So the fact that they were able to kind of execute a game plan as far as everything was with pace, and it didn't necessarily mean like we're jacking up shots with 23 on the shot clock every possession, but they were running on misses, they were running on makes, they were trying to make all 5 Shaker players run at all times. Everything, even in the half court, everything was with pace. The ball moved really quickly. Cuts were fast. Cuts were sprints. Just everything they were trying to make Shaker move maybe faster than they wanted to, and I thought they got what they wanted a lot. Just didn't convert. So you can walk away from that thinking, well, we got what we wanted. We just our shot making sucked when it usually doesn't. And we only lost by we were down 1 with the ball in the front court with the shot clock off, with a chance to win the game. So that was a little bit the way that I took it. Where I looked at that going into that game. If you asked me who I thought was going to take AAA this year, Shaker or Colony, I'll be honest, I was like, I'm kind of feeling Shakery. I'm back to 50-50. I'm back to, I'm kind of up in the air, because I feel like the way that game was played, Colony's going to win that game most of the time. I'm not necessarily going to say that game gets played that way every time they play each other, but the way that game was played, I would expect Colony to win that game. It just, they were just a bad time to have a really bad shooting night. And part of that, sorry, I one more point. Part of that is, I will say this, and now at least they got some experience against it. We know about the Shaker size compared to the Colony size. Part of why Colony had success as far as making it so that Peyton Hoblock and Malia Jackson didn't have their prints all over the game on the offensive end is because you can game plan for that. Every now and then they're just still going to be able to take advantage of it anyways, especially if they get something on the offensive glass. But you can game plan for that. You can adjust your rotations, you can clog the lane, you can kind of dictate that in a sense as far as pick your poison, and that's not the one that we're going to pick. We're going to take our chances elsewhere. You can't really game plan against you can't game plan scoring against it. So I felt like a lot of those rim attempts, even though some of them were just like very lightly guarded, if guarded at all. And there may have been a little bit of like a seeing ghost element to it. I visibly saw some like looking over the shoulder going into the gather. Who's behind me? Is it Peyton, or is Malia around, or is one of the Lannies trying to swoop up from behind? So I saw some of that looking over the shoulder. Maybe there was that seeing ghost element. A lot of those missed perimeter shots were missed long. It was enough that I noticed, like, wow, everybody's missing long. So a little bit more speed, a little bit more gusto on the perimeter shooting attempts, just because of anticipating a harder closeout with athleticism. Perhaps there's a lot of knowledge. They all play with each other, are all used to each other, but there was, you can game plan for that in one sense, but sure, the being able to score against it, that's something that you can't really, you can't get those sorts of reps in practice. You just kind of have to go up against it.
Here's the question I want to ask based on the observations I'm taking in from you about that game. Is it possible the result's different if they played on a bigger court, say like Hudson Valley?
Yeah.
Because that's just the general sense I'm getting, is that because it seems like Colony wanted, which is interesting, because typically, like, I think of both teams as more up-tempo teams, but it sounds like Colony wanted it more up-tempo than Shaker was willing to have it be. So if that was the case, it just sounds like with an extra 10 feet on the floor, that potentially gasses, and this isn't to offend the cardio at all of these players, but it allows you to wind Malia Jackson and Peyton Hoblock a little more and give you maybe more confident feeling close-up shots than they were getting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
absolutely.
I'm totally misinterpreting this, but I just feel like if they had the extra 10 feet of floor space, that would have factored into it. That would have factored in things a little bit, and potentially it could have been easily the reverse of this result.
No, absolutely. Shaker wants this game to be played half court. Like if they play a half court game, Shaker wins by 100. Colony wants this game to be played on a soccer field.
Understood.
That's they wear. These are two teams that they both wear opponents down, but they do it in different ways.
Right.
Shaker wears on you physically. You got to deal with it every single possession. You feel them every single possession, and then they break through in the fourth quarter, where teams just don't have that fight anymore. Colony wants to pace and space you, and more possessions, and they kill you. Probably where they kill teams most is defensively, your mind go. The first thing to go when you get tired is your mind. Your mind goes before your body does. And the first place that your mind falls asleep is when you're off the ball. When you're guarding off the ball. And where Colony kills people is off ball movement. Pass, cut, run. You get those stretches, especially of like there were multiple stretches of this game where the game never got physical in the sense of like it needed to be cleaned up. I think the players kind of kept a limit on that. The officials let them rock. So there were stretches of a minute 45, 2:15, 2.5 where there was no whistle. And like that's tiring. I'd be if you make me run for 2 minutes straight, I'm sucking wind like crazy right now. But probably be sucking wind back then. And you saw like there was a test of cardio conditioning in that sense because there were limited stoppages for long stretches of that game. And that's also kind of what they want, where they can break you off of that, where now you're falling asleep off the ball. And there were a couple times where they got middle drives during those long stretches where somebody like Caden Cornell or somebody gets a middle drive and help side defense is nowhere. They're just like, here, take the layup. We'll take it out of the net. But yeah, that's what they're two different styles of teams. They both have a desire to wear you until they break you, but they do it in very different ways. So yeah, Colony wants that on a college court.
Okay.
I mean, Shaker, I'm not saying Shaker's dreading playing on a college court, but Colony wants that on a 94/50, where if we change the rules of basketball and we said, we're just gonna make this 5-on-5 half court, Colony's gonna want no part of that.
And both programs will eventually go on and have good additions to their weekend. Colony would, Shaker would go on and beat Monsignor Scanlon on Monday, 64-50 in the final day of the Rose Classic. While Colony, they went down for the Rose Classic Saturday and Sunday, getting a 10-point win over High School for Construction and a 15-point win over St. John's Prep. So they're both on good momentum heading into the action this week.
Great win for Shaker.
Yes.
That win over Scanlon, that's a great win for Shaker. That's a team that beat up on Catholic High in the beginning of December. So, and that's a really, Scanlon, speaking of athletes, that's a very, very athletic team. And I think that's where, there's not, Shaker's probably the only team in this area that could fully match the sort of athleticism that Scanlon brings to the table. And another, just a double digit able to wear on them. So quality win for Shaker.
All right. I want to close out the show by asking a question, because and this is something I was feeling going into this season, but I feel it more so now that we're 2 months in. We've gotten to see these teams, hear about these teams to varying levels. I feel like Class AAA has an opportunity, and I'm not calling for this to happen, but I'm saying I feel like we could get in Hudson Valley, we could get 2023 2024, because the matchups were technically in March of 24. I feel like this year could be the Uno reverse card in a way. Here's what I mean. Going into sectionals, all the talk was Shen and Albany as the 1-2, and Shaker Colony, for lack of a better phrase, they were kind of afterthoughts as the 3 and 4. They come out, they get the 2 quote unquote upset wins, and you have the 2 young up and coming teams taking on each other, maybe a year or 2 early in people's minds in that sectional final. This year, all the talk has been Shaker and Colony. Albany's been a bit of an afterthought, even with the Zara Gates, the Sienna commit, taking care of business at point for Albany. Shen, you take Milham and Gianna Winter away from that team, it's basically all freshmen and maybe a couple of sophomores, essentially. And that's basically where all the contributions are coming from, is Winter, Milham, and then a bunch of freshmen, really. I feel like there's a potential for 2025 to be a little Uno reverse card here, where Shen and Albany come in with not nearly the hype they had gotten used to in recent years, maybe a little overlooked, maybe a little underrated. And when we get to Hudson Valley, there's that opportunity where, you know, kind of like we were talking about with the Colony Shaker game just now, where shots just don't go, where things just don't go a certain way for Shaker or Colony, and maybe Shen and Albany come in with a chip on their shoulder, remembering last year, and say, hey, the roles are reversed now at this point. Let's see how you do when we come in without the expectations. Am I crazy for thinking that at this point?
A while back, when earlier in this podcast, when we talked about Class C, and we bring up Greenwich, Stillwater, and everybody else, that's what it is, right? That's the previous 3 years in C. Greenwich and Dwaynesburg were able to look at each other and say, hey, see you next year. And if anybody, with all due respect to Maple Hill and Byrne and whoever else, if somebody unseats, probably Stillwater before they get to the finals and make that a finals matchup, that's going to be an upset, as long as everyone's at full strength, right? I don't feel that way about AAA. I think that the point that you make is a good one. It's close enough that you cannot overlook the 3 and the 4. Or whatever, who knows? Shen and Shaker haven't played each other yet, so who knows? How the seeding isn't necessarily full out set in stone. But we look at Shaker Colony. It's not there isn't some sort of a considerably wide gap that Shen and Albany couldn't on any given night.
Right. And I'm not necessarily saying that everybody was crowning Shaker and Colony before the season.
But I just
feel like the last 2 months, these first 2 months of the season, all the talk about AA has been Shaker and Colony, and it's been drops of Albany here, drops of Shen there. Not necessarily from us. I'm just talking in general.
I know I do it. I've done it.
Yeah,
I've talked a lot about Shaker Colony.
I just feel like there's that, but I mean, you saw Albany when they were playing at Holy Names, and things weren't locked in necessarily as maybe you thought they would be for Albany in that game. You saw Shen when you were out in Amsterdam with me during the Christmas break. So I just feel like
in Shen Colony, it was right before Christmas break. It was
right. I just feel like that there's
beautiful basketball.
I just feel like there's levels to this, and if we're gonna put all the levels out there, you have to have the way things were approached going into Hudson Valley last March from 2024 in the back of your mind when we do get to that time of the year again in a month and a half or so. So that's just what I'm putting out there.
Yeah, no, it's natural for those two to look at each other, especially because it's North Colony and South Colony, And those kids, since they're around the same age and they're all, predominantly younger, or junior, sophomore, those kids have been battling each other in these sorts of, since the Capital District Girls Basketball League, junior B's and biddy A's and junior A's and whatever you guys call it. I'm not from here. But it's been kind of the same group that has been towards the top, and since they were like little kids and playing each other, like it's natural for them to kind of look at each other, North and South Colony. But yeah, this is no, like, I won't even say look past Shen and Albany at your own risk. It's just like, just don't look past them. Shen is absolutely good enough on any given day. Shen, I think Albany's a little bit more of like an any given day sort of team because of the matchup, the style. Shen, yeah, like Shen's in that discussion. They stay out of foul trouble. They shoot it halfway decent. Maya Parker's played. They've got the 3 junior, 2 freshman starting lineup with Milham, Winter, Parker, and then Kaylee Weber and Gianna Soden. Like, this is a kind of a test. In a way, it was almost like a test run for them because they knew they'd have everyone back next year. But yeah, they're right in the discussion. I think they showed that when they that game a month ago at Colony. Some of the other ones, like I know that people a week and a half ago or however long it was at this point, were talking about how they lost to Columbia, and then when Columbia just did the same thing to Averill Park, I don't hear anybody talking about how Shen lost to Columbia anymore.
Right.
It's just, but Columbia did the same thing to Colony, right? So, that's they're right in that talk, and Albany, depending on the style of the game, how physical it is, how physical it's allowed to be. They get somebody that they've got a couple streaky shooters. They get somebody knocking down shots like any given day. So yeah, it's this one doesn't, like, AAA to me doesn't get interesting at the finals. It's interesting at the semifinals.
Yeah, I agree. All right, man. That wraps up everything for this episode. Try to stay warm. Enjoy your travels. Enjoy your travels this week. I know you've got a couple of pins in there. We talked about Greenwich Stillwater being one of them. So, or BP Queensbury. I'm sorry. So I know you got a couple of pins out there for games you're looking at. So we'll catch them again next week, and safe travels, man. Be good. All right.
It sounds good. See you next week.